I'm so excited to share my Grunt If You Understand vocabulary terminology series. Remember, these ideas are going to be comical, they're going to be playful, often absurd, and definitely fun, which is what makes them so memorable. Before we get started, a quick reminder that the Grunt If You Understand method of ballet training goes well beyond the vocabulary and terminology of dance. It's going to help dancers understand all of the mechanics of ballet technique, from the smallest details to the big picture. So you can find out more about that full program at gruntifyouunderstand.com. So let's get right into the Grunt If You Understand vocabulary terminology series.
What do bridges have to do with ballet?
So what do suspension bridges have to do with ballet? This is another episode from our vocabulary and terminology series, and today we're going to learn temps lié. Temps lié I find to be a tricky one. It's hard to connect the direct translation with a visualization, but this is the one that I use. Temps lié means time linked, but when we execute a temps lié, we begin with a very lifted position, a tendu, and then we roll down to a lower position before we continue to the other lifted position. So it looks as if we are coming from a mountain to a valley and back up to the other mountain. So you start up on the cliff with that tendu, and then you go down into the valley and then back up to the other cliff across the way. So if temps lié means time linked, I teach my students that it's time to link those cliffs to the other cliffs as we go over that valley. So we're going to visualize a suspension bridge. And a suspension bridge is one of those bridges that hangs from one cliff or mountain to the other cliff or mountain. They usually are made of some sort of cable, and they have slats of wood going across those two cables. They are slung down over that valley. So you explain to your students, there's a cliff here on this mountainside, there's a valley down here, perhaps with a river below, and then there's this other mountain and cliff on the other side. And how do we get from one cliff to the other? We're going to go on this suspension bridge. So we are going to start high, dip down onto the bridge to get to the other side. So temps lié, time linked, it is time to link those two cliffs with a suspension bridge. Tendu, link to the other side. Tendu, link to the other cliff. Temps lié, tendu, down on the suspension bridge to the other side. Tendu, temps lié, time linked. An interesting note is I usually try to teach my students chasse at the bar the week before I teach temps lié, because the students get these kind of confused, and when they're attempting to execute a temps lié in a combination, they may use a chasse, or if they're attempting to use a chasse, they may use a temps lié. So if I'm giving tendu, temps lié, I may get students just chasseing and temps liéing. And we have to teach them to be accurate and to be correct, that a chasse would begin with a plie to chasse to that position, a plie to chasse to that position. Whereas a temps lié, you would tendu and then shift the weight, and tendu and shift the weight. So I take a moment to do some air drawing, and I tell them that chasse looks like this. It's an uphill climb. You start at the bottom of the mountain or the valley, and you climb to the top of the cliff. So we need to plie to be able to get to the bottom of that valley to then chasse uphill. So your chasse is always working uphill, and you can't chasse uphill unless you get down to the bottom first. So how do you do that? You must plie. So plie to chasse. Then when I teach tenlie, I again draw it for them because tenlie looks like this, starting at the top of the cliff, going down to the valley and back up to the cliff. So again, chasse is just an uphill climb. You will need a plie to come down first. Whereas tenlie is you're on the cliff, you go down on the suspension bridge and to the other side. So tendu, tenlie, or plie to chasse. Tenlie is from top to the valley to the top. Chasse is plie to get to the bottom, chasse to the top. I put them together on purpose because they are going to get confused, and this way we can do exercises with these chasses and tenlies purposefully so that I can make sure they know the difference between the two. But today we are working on our tenlie, which means time linked, and it's time to link that cliff to that cliff with a suspension bridge. So what do suspension bridges have to do with ballet? They're going to help us with our terminology so that we know that tenlie means time to link, time linked.
Grunt if you understand.
Thank you for joining me for Grunt If You Understand's vocabulary and terminology series. I hope you'll check back as the library of visualizations expands.